The telegram arrived at the Boston boarding house on a Tuesday morning in October 1882. And Penelope Barrett knew, before she even opened it, that her life was about to change forever in ways she could scarcely imagine. She sat on the narrow bed in the cramped room she shared with 3 other women, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the yellow paper. The words were brief and businesslike, exactly what she had expected from a man seeking a mail-order bride in the Arizona Territory. "We'll meet you in Tombstone. Prepare for ranch work. Zachary Garrett." That was all. No pleasantries, no false promises of comfort or ease. Just the stark truth that he needed help on his ranch and she would be expected to work hard for her keep. Penelope folded the telegram carefully and placed it in the small wooden box where she kept her few precious possessions. At 22 years old, she had spent the last 8 years working in textile mills, her fingers raw and bleeding from the endless hours at the looms. When the mill closed last spring, she had moved to the boarding house and taken whatever work she could find, scrubbing floors, washing laundry, mending clothes until her eyes ached in the dim lamplight. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed like a cruel joke at first, but desperation had a way of making even the most unlikely options seem reasonable. She had written to Zachary Garrett with complete honesty. She was not beautiful, she had told him plainly. She was tall and thin, with brown hair that refused to hold a curl and hands that were already rough from years of hard labor. But she was strong, she was healthy, and she was not afraid of work. Most importantly, she had added at the end of her letter, she would not complain. Whatever conditions awaited her in Arizona could hardly be worse than what she had already endured. His reply had been equally direct. He owned a cattle ranch outside Tombstone. He needed a wife who could cook, clean, tend a garden, help with the livestock when necessary, and manage the household while he worked the land. He was 30 years old, he wrote, and had been trying to run the ranch alone since his mother died 2 years prior. The work was too much for one person. If she was willing to come west and marry him, he would pay her train fare and provide room and board. It was not a romantic proposal, but Penelope had long since given up on romance. Survival was what mattered now. The journey west took nearly 2 weeks. Penelope sat in the crowded train car with her single battered trunk, watching the landscape change from the familiar forests of New England to the endless plains and finally to the harsh, beautiful desert of Arizona. The other passengers eyed her with curiosity and sometimes pity. They could tell from her cheap dress and worn boots that she was one of those desperate women traveling west to marry a stranger, gambling everything on the hope that life on the frontier might be better than what they were leaving behind. When the train finally pulled into Tombstone, Penelope gathered her courage and stepped onto the platform. The October sun was still fierce, beating down on the dusty street with an intensity she had never experienced in Boston. She squinted against the glare, searching the small crowd for a man who might be looking for her. "Miss Barrett." She turned and found herself face to face with the most handsome man she had ever seen. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His dark hair needed a trim, curling slightly at the collar of his clean white shirt, and his eyes were the deep brown of rich earth. But it was his expression that caught her off guard. He was looking at her not with the cold appraisal she had expected, but with something that almost resembled concern. "Mr. Garrett," she managed to say, suddenly acutely aware of how travel-stained and exhausted she must look after 2 weeks on the train. "Zachary, please." He reached for her trunk without waiting for permission, lifting it easily despite its weight. "The wagon is just over here. You must be tired. We have about an hour's drive to the ranch, but I brought cushions for the seat and there is water in the canteen." Penelope followed him to where a sturdy wagon stood waiting, pulled by 2 patient horses. True to his word, the wooden seat had been padded with what looked like quilts, and a canteen hung from the side within easy reach. He lifted her trunk into the back as though it weighed nothing, then turned to help her up onto the seat. "I can manage," she started to say, but he was already offering his hand. "The step is high," he said simply, and she took his hand because refusing would have been foolish. His palm was calloused, but his grip was gentle, and he steadied her carefully until she was settled on the seat. As they left Tombstone behind, Penelope tried to prepare herself for what was coming. She had expected a hard man, worn down by frontier life and desperate for help with his failing ranch. She had prepared herself to work from dawn until long after dark, to sleep in whatever corner he could spare, to earn her keep through backbreaking labor. But nothing about Zachary Garrett matched the picture she had formed in her mind. "I hope the journey was not too difficult," he said as the horses pulled the wagon along the dusty road. "I know it is a long way from Boston." "It was fine," Penelope replied, because she had learned long ago that complaining served no purpose. "I am grateful for the opportunity." He glanced at her, and she saw something flicker in his expression. "You do not need to be grateful. You are doing me the favor, coming all this way to marry a stranger." The landscape around them was like nothing Penelope had ever seen. Instead of trees, there were strange tall cacti with arms reaching toward the sky, and low scrubby bushes dotting the red earth. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and gold in the afternoon light. It was harsh and unforgiving, but there was a strange beauty to it that made her catch her breath. "It is very different from Boston," she said quietly. "I imagine so." Zachary kept his eyes on the road ahead. "It takes some getting used to. The heat, the dryness. But there is water on my land, a creek that runs year-round, and the house is built to stay cool even in summer. You will have everything you need." Penelope wanted to ask what he meant by everything she needed, but she held her tongue. She would find out soon enough what her life here would be like. When they finally reached the ranch, Penelope had to blink to make sure she was seeing correctly. She had expected a rough cabin, maybe a single room with a loft, the kind of primitive dwelling she had heard frontier settlers often lived in. Instead, before her stood a proper house, built of adobe with a wide porch wrapping around the front. There was glass in the windows, real glass, and the door was solid wood with iron hinges. "I know it is not what you are used to in the city," Zachary said, and she realized he had mistaken her silence for disappointment. "It is beautiful," she said honestly, and saw surprise flash across his face. He helped her down from the wagon and retrieved her trunk. "Let me show you inside. You must want a rest after such a long journey." The interior of the house was even more surprising than the exterior. The main room was spacious, with a real wood floor and furniture that, while simple, was well made and sturdy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and colorful woven rugs added warmth to the space. Through a doorway, she could see a kitchen with a cast iron stove and shelves lined with dishes and cooking implements. "There are 2 bedrooms," Zachary said, carrying her trunk toward a door on the left side of the room. "This one was my mother's. I have been sleeping in my father's old room, so this one is yours." He set the trunk down carefully at the foot of the bed and stepped back quickly, as though he did not want her to think he was presuming anything. "I know we came here to get married, but I thought you might want some time to settle in first, to be sure this is what you want." Penelope stared at him in confusion. The bedroom he had given her was larger than the room she had shared with 3 other women at the boarding house. The bed was a real bed with a proper mattress, covered in a beautiful quilt in shades of blue and cream. There was a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, even a chair by the window with cushions that matched the quilt. "I do not understand," she said finally. "You need help with the ranch work. I came here to work." Zachary rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she would come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I do need help. That is true enough. But I did not bring you all the way from Boston to work yourself to death. I thought we could be partners, you and I. You would manage the house, the garden, maybe help me with the books since I am terrible at accounting. I would handle the cattle and the heavier work outside." "But that is not enough," Penelope protested. "I need to earn my place here." "I expected to work much harder than that." Something changed in his expression then, a softness that made him look younger than his 30 years. "Penelope, I have been alone on this ranch for 2 years trying to do everything myself. I am so tired, not just in my body but in my soul. I do not need a servant or a hired hand. I need someone to share this life with, someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to make this house feel like a home again. That is worth more to me than any amount of physical labor." Penelope did not know what to say to that. No one in her entire life had ever suggested that her company alone might be valuable. She had always been valued only for what she could produce, how many hours she could work, how much she could endure without complaint. "I will leave you to rest," Zachary said when she remained silent. "There is water in the pitcher and towels in the dresser. Take your time getting settled. I will start supper in an hour or so. You will cook." The words came out before she could stop them. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "I have been cooking for myself for 2 years. I am not very good at it, but I manage. Though I will not pretend I am not looking forward to having someone else in the kitchen. My mother tried to teach me, but I never had the patience for it." After he left, closing the door gently behind him, Penelope sank down onto the bed. The mattress was soft, the quilt was clean and smelled of lavender, and through the window she could see the mountains painted gold by the setting sun. She had come here expecting to sleep in a barn and work until her hands bled. Instead, she had been given a beautiful room and told that her company was what mattered most. It did not make sense. Men did not bring mail-order brides across the country just for companionship. There had to be more to it, some catch she had not yet discovered. But as she unpacked her few belongings and washed the travel dust from her face, she could not help the small spark of hope that flickered to life in her chest. That evening, Zachary did indeed cook supper. The meal was simple, beans and cornbread with dried beef, but he served it on real plates at a proper table. He pulled out a chair for her, poured water into her glass, and treated her with a courtesy that left her bewildered. "Tell me about Boston," he said as they ate. "I have never been east of St. Louis." Penelope found herself talking more than she had in years. She told him about the boarding house, about the other women she had lived with who were all struggling just as she had been. She found herself describing the textile mill where she had worked as a girl, the deafening noise of the machines and the lint that filled the air until you could hardly breathe. "That sounds terrible," Zachary said quietly when she finished. "No wonder you wanted to leave." "It was survival," Penelope said simply. "You do what you must." "Well, there will be none of that here." His voice was firm. "This is your home now, Penelope. Not a workplace, not a prison. A home." After supper, Zachary insisted on washing the dishes while she explored the house more thoroughly. The shelves were filled with books, which surprised her until she remembered he had mentioned being bad at accounting. A man who owned books was a man who valued learning. There were also small touches throughout the house that spoke of a woman's presence, though one that had been gone for some time. Dried flowers in a vase, embroidered pillows, a framed sampler on the wall with a verse about home and family. My mother made most of those things, Zachary said, coming to stand beside her as she examined the sampler. She loved this house. She and my father built it together when they first came to Arizona back in '68. They had big dreams for this place. What happened to your father? Penelope asked softly. He was thrown from a horse 5 years ago, broke his neck. He died before we could even get him back to the house. Zachary's voice was matter of fact, but she could hear the old pain underneath. My mother never really recovered from losing him. She kept going for a few years, but her heart was not in it anymore. She got sick 2 winters ago and just did not have the strength to fight it. I am sorry, Penelope said, and meant it. It is the way of things out here. Life is hard and death comes easy. He turned to look at her directly. That is part of why I wanted you to know right from the start that I will do everything in my power to make sure you are safe and comfortable here. I know what it is to lose people you love. I do not take it lightly that you have trusted me enough to come all this way. That night, lying in the soft bed in her beautiful room, Penelope tried to make sense of everything that had happened. She had prepared herself for the worst, and instead had been given something she had never dared to hope for. But she could not quite let herself believe it was real. There had to be a reason, something she was missing. Men did not treat women like queens without expecting something in return. She would wait, she decided. She would watch and learn and try to understand what Zachary Garrett really wanted from her. And in the meantime, she would work hard to prove that she deserved the kindness he had shown her, even if she could not quite understand it. The next morning, Penelope woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 work dresses and went out to find Zachary already in the kitchen, tending the stove. "Good morning," he said with that same gentle smile. "I hope I did not wake you." "I am used to starting early." "I should be the one cooking breakfast," Penelope protested. "That is why you brought me here, is it not? To take care of the house. You just arrived yesterday after 2 weeks of travel. I think you have earned a morning to rest." He gestured to the table. "Sit. The bacon is almost ready and the coffee is hot." Penelope sat because she did not know what else to do, and Zachary served her breakfast as though she were a guest in a hotel rather than a mail-order bride who should be earning her keep. The food was actually quite good, better than he had led her to believe his cooking would be, and the coffee was strong and hot and exactly what she needed. "I thought today we could ride out and I could show you the property," Zachary said as they ate. "I want you to get familiar with the land, where the water is, which areas to avoid, just in case you ever need to know." "In case of what?" Penelope asked. "In case anything happens to me and you need to take care of things yourself." He said it so casually, as though planning for his own death was the most natural thing in the world. "Out here, you have to be prepared for anything. I want to make sure you know how to handle yourself if you are ever alone." It was a practical concern, Penelope realized, and one that showed he was thinking of her safety rather than assuming she would always have someone to take care of her. It was, in its own way, a sign of respect. After breakfast, Zachary saddled 2 horses while Penelope washed the dishes, insisting it was the least she could do. When she came outside, he had brought around a gentle-looking mare with a calm disposition. "This is Rosie," he said, stroking the mare's nose. "She was my mother's horse. She is as steady as they come, perfect for someone who might not have much riding experience." "I have never been on a horse in my life," Penelope admitted. "Well, today is a good day to learn." Zachary's voice was patient, encouraging. "Rosie will take care of you. She knows every inch of this land, and she will not do anything to put you in danger." He showed her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit properly in the saddle. His instructions were clear, and he never made her feel foolish for not knowing. When she was settled on Rosie's back, he mounted his own horse, a big gelding named Buck, and led the way away from the house at a gentle walk. The ranch was larger than Penelope had realized. Zachary showed her the boundaries of his property, pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout of the land. There was the year-round creek he had mentioned, running clear and cold between rocky banks. There was a natural hollow where the cattle liked to gather in the heat of the day. There were stands of cottonwood trees that provided shade and showed where water was close to the surface. "It is not the biggest ranch in Arizona," Zachary said as they paused on a rise overlooking the property, "but it is good land. My father chose well. There is enough water, enough grass for the cattle, enough shelter from the worst of the summer sun. With proper management, it can support us comfortably." "How many cattle do you have?" Penelope asked. "About 200 head right now." "I could handle more if I had help, but that is a good number for one person to manage." He glanced at her. "I was thinking, if you are interested, you could help me with the spring roundup. Not the heavy work, but maybe help me keep track of the count, mark down which calves belong to which cows, that sort of thing. It would make the work go faster and more accurately." "I would like that," Penelope said, and realized she meant it. The idea of being truly useful, of being a real partner in the running of the ranch, appealed to her in a way she had not expected. They rode for most of the morning, and by the time they returned to the house, Penelope was sore from the unaccustomed exercise but also exhilarated. She had never seen so much open space, never experienced the feeling of freedom that came from riding across land that stretched to the horizon in every direction. "You did well," Zachary said as he helped her dismount, his hand steadying her when her legs wobbled slightly. "Most people fall off at least once their first time on a horse. Rosie took good care of me, just as you said she would." Penelope patted the mare's neck gratefully. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine that surprised Penelope with its comfort. She took over the cooking and found that Zachary was genuinely appreciative of her meals, even though they were simple fare. She cleaned the house, which hardly needed it since Zachary had been keeping it neat himself. She started working in the garden, which had been neglected since his mother's death, but still had good soil and plenty of potential. But what surprised her most was how Zachary continued to treat her. He never demanded anything of her. He always asked if she needed help with heavy work. He made sure she had time to rest in the afternoon when the sun was hottest. He talked to her in the evenings, asking her opinions and actually listening to her answers. He treated her, she realized with wonder, as though she mattered. One evening, about a week after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The air had finally cooled from the heat of the day, and there was a breeze that smelled of sage and creosote. "I want to ask you something," Zachary said, his voice quiet. "And I want you to answer honestly without worrying about whether it is what I want to hear." Penelope's heart began to beat faster. This was it, she thought. This was when he would reveal what he really expected from her. "All right," she said carefully. "You want to marry me?" The question hung in the air between them. Penelope turned to look at him and found him watching her with an expression of genuine uncertainty. "You brought me all the way from Boston to be your wife," she said slowly. "I assumed marriage was expected. Expected, yes. But I am asking what you want." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I know the circumstances that brought you here. I know you came because you were desperate, because you had no other options. But now that you are here, now that you have seen what life on this ranch would be like, I need to know if this is something you actually want or if you feel trapped." "What are my options?" Penelope asked, trying to understand what he was really saying. "If you want to marry me, we can ride into Tombstone tomorrow and find a preacher. We will do it proper and legal, and you will be my wife in every sense of the word." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "If you are not sure yet, you can stay here as long as you need to make up your mind. You will have your own room, and I will not pressure you for anything you are not ready to give. And if you decide this is not what you want at all, I will give you enough money to get back to Boston or to start over somewhere else, wherever you choose." Penelope stared at him in disbelief. "You would let me leave, after paying for me to come all this way? You are not property, Penelope. You are a person who deserves to make her own choices about her life." His voice was fierce now, passionate in a way she had not heard from him before. "I want a wife, yes. I want a partner to share this life with. But I want someone who chooses to be here, not someone who stays because she has no other option. That is not a real marriage. That is just another kind of prison." For a long moment, Penelope could not speak. She thought about everything she had learned about this man over the past week. The way he cooked meals without being asked, because he did not want her to have to work when she was tired. The way he had given her the best room in the house, and never once suggested she owed him anything in return. The way he spoke to her as an equal, valued her opinions, made sure she felt safe and cared for. She thought about the men she had known in Boston, the factory owners who had worked girls to death without a second thought, the landlords who had demanded favors in exchange for a roof over their heads, the respectable gentlemen who had looked through her as though she did not exist because she was poor and common. None of them had ever treated her with a fraction of the respect and kindness that Zachary Garrett showed her every single day. "I want to marry you," she said quietly, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "Not because I have no other choice, though a week ago that was true, but because in the short time I have been here, you have shown me what it means to be valued. You have treated me better than anyone ever has in my entire life. And I find that I want very much to stay here with you and build a life together." The smile that spread across Zachary's face was like sunrise. "Tomorrow, then, we will go to Tombstone and make it official." "Tomorrow," Penelope agreed, and felt something warm and bright unfold in her chest. It might have been hope. They were married the next day in a small church in Tombstone, with the preacher's wife and the owner of the general store as witnesses. Penelope wore her best dress, which was not much, but Zachary looked at her as though she were wearing silk and diamonds. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other, and when Zachary kissed her at the end of the ceremony, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. After the wedding, they stopped at the general store to buy supplies. While Zachary was arranging for the order to be loaded into the wagon, the storekeeper's wife, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, pulled Penelope aside. "I hope you will be happy here," she said warmly. "Zachary is a good man. His parents were fine people and they raised him right. There are not many men in this territory who would treat a wife the way he will treat you." "I am beginning to understand that," Penelope said. "If you ever need anything, or if you just want someone to talk to, I am here most days," Mrs. Chen continued. "We women have to look out for each other out here. It can be lonely on the ranches, especially if you are not used to it." Penelope thanked her sincerely, touched by the offer of friendship. She had not had a real friend in so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The ride back to the ranch felt different than it had just a week earlier. Then, Penelope had been uncertain and afraid, braced for disappointment and hardship. Now, she was returning home as a wife, as a partner, as someone who belonged. The desert no longer seemed quite so harsh. Instead, she could see the beauty in it, the stark magnificence of the landscape under the endless blue sky. That night, after supper, Zachary took her hand and led her to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He had cleaned and prepared it while she had been getting ready at the church, and there were fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, still holding her hand gently. "If you need more time before we share a bed, I understand. I can sleep on the couch." But Penelope shook her head. "You are my husband now. This is where you belong." What happened next was tender and careful, Zachary taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cared for. He was patient with her inexperience, gentle with her nervousness, and by the time they finally came together as husband and wife, Penelope felt not just willing but eager. It was nothing like she had feared it might be, nothing like the crude stories she had heard from other women at the boarding house. Instead, it was sweet and intimate, a joining of not just bodies but hearts. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Zachary held her close and stroked her hair. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy," he murmured. "I promise you that, Penelope. You will never regret coming here." "I do not regret it already," she whispered back, and realized it was true. In less than 2 weeks, her entire life had transformed. She had gone from desperate and alone to married to a good man with a home and a future. It seemed too good to be true, like something that would be snatched away at any moment. But the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, and nothing was taken away. Instead, life just kept getting better. Penelope threw herself into making the house a true home. She started baking bread, the smell filling the house and making Zachary's face light up every time he came in from working outside. She planted a proper vegetable garden, carefully tending the precious plants in the harsh climate. She learned to make butter and cheese, to preserve fruit, to sew and mend. But she also did more than traditional women's work. True to his word, Zachary taught her everything about running the ranch. She learned to keep the books, tracking expenses and income with the careful attention to detail that her years in the textile mill had trained her for. She learned to recognize which cattle were healthy and which needed special attention. She helped with the calving in the spring, staying up all night when necessary to make sure both mother and calf survived. Zachary never once made her feel like her contributions were less valuable than his. When she successfully doctored a sick calf back to health, using knowledge from one of his mother's old books, he praised her intelligence and quick thinking. When she figured out a better system for tracking which cattle had been branded, he implemented it immediately and told her she was a better rancher than he was. They worked as true partners, and Penelope felt herself becoming someone she had never imagined she could be. She was stronger, both in body and spirit. She was confident in her abilities and her worth. And she was, despite all odds, happy. The loneliness that Mrs. Chen had warned her about never really materialized, partly because Zachary was such good company. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit together and talk about everything and nothing. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and their love story, about the early days of Tombstone when it was just a mining camp. She told him more about her life in Boston, the dreams she had abandoned as a girl when she realized that someone like her would never have the opportunity to pursue them. "What did you want to be?" Zachary asked one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "I wanted to be a teacher," Penelope admitted, something she had not told anyone in years. "I loved learning, loved books. I thought if I could just get enough education, I could teach other children and give them opportunities they might not otherwise have." "You still could," Zachary said thoughtfully. "There is no school near here, but there are families scattered around with children who need education. You could teach them if you wanted to." "I never finished my own education," Penelope pointed out. "I only went to school until I was 10, and then I had to go to work in the mill." You read better than anyone I know, and your arithmetic is flawless. I have seen how you handle the ranch accounts." Zachary turned to look at her. "I think you would make an excellent teacher, Penelope. And I think you should pursue that dream if it still matters to you." The idea took root in her mind and would not let go. Over the next few months, she began reaching out to the scattered families in the area, offering to teach their children reading, writing, and arithmetic. At first, only a few parents were interested, but as word spread of her skill and patience, more children started coming to the ranch twice a week for lessons. Zachary built her a schoolroom, converting an unused storage building into a proper classroom with benches and a blackboard. He bought her books and slates and paper, never once complaining about the expense. When she thanked him, he just shook his head. "You are doing important work," he said simply. "Those children deserve a chance to learn, and you deserve a chance to use your gifts. Why would I not support that?" By the time their first anniversary rolled around in October of 1883, Penelope felt like a completely different person than the desperate woman who had arrived in Tombstone a year earlier. She had a home she loved, work that fulfilled her, and a husband who treated her not just like a queen but like an equal partner in every aspect of their life together. For their anniversary, Zachary surprised her with a trip to Tucson. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through the streets looking at shops. He bought her a new dress, a beautiful blue calico that made her feel almost elegant, and a pair of proper shoes to replace her worn work boots. But the best gift was simply having time alone together, away from the constant demands of the ranch. On their last night in Tucson, as they lay together in the hotel room, Penelope finally put into words something she had been feeling for months. "I love you," she said softly. "I know I have never said it before, but it is true. I love you, Zachary." He pulled her closer, his arms tightening around her. "I love you too. I have for a long time now, but I did not want to pressure you by saying it first. I wanted you to have time to feel secure here, to know that my feelings were not dependent on yours." "When did you know?" Penelope asked. "Truthfully, I think I started falling in love with you the day you arrived. You were so brave, traveling all that way to marry a stranger. So determined to prove your worth, even though you had no idea what you were walking into. And then every day after that, you just kept surprising me with your strength and intelligence and kindness. How could I not love you?" "I expected such different things when I came here," Penelope whispered. "I expected to work myself to exhaustion just to earn a place to sleep. Instead, you gave me a home and a partnership and more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. You earned all of that by being yourself," Zachary said firmly. "Not through labor or obligation, but just by being the remarkable woman you are." They made love then, slow and sweet, and Penelope thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had not even known what real love felt like, had never experienced true intimacy or partnership. Now she could not imagine her life any other way. When they returned to the ranch, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. At first, she was not sure, but as the weeks passed and the signs became unmistakable, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She had heard so many stories about women dying in childbirth, especially out here where doctors were scarce and help was far away. When she told Zachary, he immediately rode to Tombstone and arranged for a midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who had delivered dozens of babies in the territory. He made Penelope promise to take things easier, to rest more, to let him handle more of the work. "I am pregnant, not dying," Penelope protested. "I am perfectly capable of doing everything I have been doing." "I know you are capable," Zachary said patiently, "but you do not have to prove anything to me, remember. Let me take care of you, please." So Penelope tried to slow down, though it went against every instinct she had developed over years of pushing herself to the limit. She continued teaching the children, but reduced her other work. She let Zachary do more of the cooking and cleaning. She took naps in the afternoon, resting in their bed with the windows open to catch the breeze. As her belly grew, Zachary became even more attentive and protective. He treated her as though she were made of glass, rushing to help her with anything heavy, insisting she sit down whenever possible, worrying constantly about her health. It was both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Penelope understood that his concern came from love and from having lost both his parents already. The baby was born in July of 1884, after a long labor that left Penelope exhausted but triumphant. It was a boy, healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs that he used to announce his arrival to the world. "He is perfect," Zachary said, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Penelope, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Peter, after Penelope's father who had died when she was young. Zachary took to fatherhood with the same dedication and care he brought to everything else. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Peter when he cried at night, and generally proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. Watching him with their son, Penelope felt her love for him deepen even further. She had known he was a good man, but seeing him so tender and patient with their baby revealed new dimensions of his character. He sang lullabies in a surprisingly good voice, told ridiculous stories that made no sense but seemed to soothe Peter anyway, and spent hours just holding his son and marveling at the miracle of him. Life settled into a new rhythm. Penelope continued teaching, bringing Peter with her to the schoolroom where he would sleep in a basket while she gave lessons. The other children adored him, and as he grew older, they would take turns entertaining him while Penelope worked with their siblings. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Zachary expanded the herd, carefully selecting breeding stock to improve the quality of their cattle. Penelope's meticulous record-keeping meant they always knew exactly how the ranch was performing financially, which allowed them to make smart decisions about investments and improvements. They added on to the house, building a proper nursery for Peter and an additional bedroom for future children. They improved the irrigation system for the garden, installed a better pump for the well, and built a new barn that was larger and more efficient than the old one. But more than the physical improvements, the ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where things were done right. Zachary was respected for his fair dealing and quality stock. Penelope was admired for her teaching and her skill at managing the complex operations of a successful ranch. Together, they became pillars of the growing community. When Peter was 2 years old, Penelope gave birth to twin girls. The labor was harder than with Peter, and there were moments when even Mrs. Rodriguez looked worried. But Penelope was strong, and both babies were born healthy despite being smaller than Peter had been. They named the twins Patricia and Pauline, and Zachary was absolutely besotted with his daughters. He carried them around constantly, one in each arm, talking to them about cattle and horses and the land they would inherit someday. When they were old enough, he taught them to ride just as carefully as he had taught Penelope, making sure they were confident and capable on horseback. The years passed in a blur of work and joy and love. Peter grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother did, and could already do arithmetic that impressed the adults around him. The twins were wild and adventurous, always exploring and getting into mischief, but they had good hearts and learned quickly. Penelope continued teaching, and her little school grew until there were nearly 20 children coming for regular lessons. Some families even moved to the area specifically because they heard there was a good teacher nearby. The community was growing, becoming more established and civilized, and Penelope felt proud of the small role she played in that development. She also continued to be a full partner in running the ranch. As the children grew older and needed her less constantly, she was able to take on more of the outdoor work again. She loved riding out across the land with Zachary, checking on the cattle, making decisions together about the future of the ranch. They were truly equal partners in every way. One evening in 1889, when Peter was 5 and the twins were 3, Zachary and Penelope sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Peter was carefully building something with sticks while the twins tried to knock it down, and their laughter filled the air. "Did you ever imagine this?" Zachary asked quietly. "7 years ago, when you got off that train in Tombstone, did you ever dream life could be this good?" Penelope thought about it carefully before answering. "No," she said honestly. "I could not have imagined this. I did not even know life like this was possible for someone like me. I thought happiness was something only wealthy people got to experience." "You were wrong," Zachary said, taking her hand. "Happiness has nothing to do with wealth. It has to do with love and partnership and building something meaningful together." "I know that now." Penelope squeezed his hand. "You taught me that. You showed me what it means to be valued and respected and loved. You changed my entire life, Zachary." "No," he said firmly. "We changed each other's lives. I was just existing before you came, just going through the motions. You made this place a real home. You made me a better man. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just survival. We did this together, Penelope. It was always together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Penelope thought about the telegram she had received so many years ago, those few brief words that had changed everything. She thought about how frightened she had been, how she had steeled herself to endure whatever hardships awaited her. She had come to Arizona expecting hard labor and hardship. Instead, she had found a cowboy who treated her like a queen, who valued her for who she was rather than what she could do for him. She had found love and partnership and a life richer than any she could have imagined in her bleakest moments back in Boston. The ranch continued to grow and prosper over the years. By 1892, they had expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when it became available. They built a proper schoolhouse on their property, and Penelope's school became officially recognized by the territorial government. She even hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Tucson who had graduated from a teaching college and was thrilled to have the opportunity to work in such a supportive environment. Peter grew into a young man who combined his mother's love of learning with his father's practical skills. By the time he was 12, he was already helping Zachary with the more complex aspects of ranch management and talking about maybe going to university someday to study agriculture. The twins remained inseparable, two sides of the same coin. Patricia was the more cautious one, always thinking things through, while Pauline jumped into everything with enthusiasm. Together they kept the household lively and full of laughter. In 1893, Penelope gave birth to another son whom they named Philip. By then, she was 33 and Zachary was 41, and they had agreed this would be their last child. The ranch was doing well enough that they could afford to provide for 4 children comfortably, but they also wanted to make sure each child had opportunities for education and a good start in life. Philip was a sunny baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world around him with bright, curious eyes. Peter took his role as big brother seriously, helping care for the baby with a tenderness that made Penelope's heart swell with pride. The twins were initially less interested in their new brother, but gradually warmed up to him, especially when they realized he laughed at their antics. Life was not without its challenges, of course. There were droughts that made every drop of water precious. There were years when cattle prices fell and they had to tighten their belts. There were injuries and illnesses, moments of fear when one of the children took sick or Zachary was thrown from a horse. But through it all, Penelope and Zachary faced everything together. They supported each other, made decisions jointly, and never let the hardships of frontier life diminish the love and respect they had for each other. Mrs. Chen remained a good friend over the years, and through her, Penelope developed friendships with other women in the area. They would meet occasionally for quilting bees or simply to share conversation and support. These friendships were precious to Penelope, reminding her that she was part of a community and not alone in the challenges of raising a family and running a household in such an unforgiving environment. As the years passed and the children grew, Penelope sometimes found herself reflecting on how different her life had turned out from what she had expected. She thought about the girl she had been in Boston, working her fingers raw in the textile mill, sleeping in a cramped room with no privacy, never imagining that she could be anything more than what she was. Now she was a teacher, respected in the community for her knowledge and skill. She was a rancher, capable of managing complex business operations and making decisions that affected the livelihood of her family. She was a mother, raising children who were healthy and educated and full of potential. And most importantly, she was a wife to a man who loved her deeply and treated her as a true equal. In 1898, when Penelope was 38 and Zachary was 47, Peter left for university in California. It was a bittersweet moment, proud and heartbreaking at the same time. They stood at the train station in Tombstone, Penelope fighting back tears as she hugged her firstborn goodbye. "You have been a wonderful son," she told him, holding his face in her hands. "Your father and I are so proud of you. Go learn everything you can and then come back and help us make this ranch even better." "I will, Ma," Peter promised, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I will make you proud." "You already have," Zachary said gruffly, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "Every single day of your life, you have made us proud." After Peter left, the house felt strangely quiet even with 3 other children still at home, but life continued, full and busy. The twins were 13 now, smart and capable and already showing signs of becoming formidable women. Patricia had inherited her mother's love of teaching and often helped with the younger students at the school. Pauline had her father's way with animals and could calm even the most fractious horse. Philip, at 5 years old, was the baby of the family and delighted in the attention his older sisters lavished on him. He was already showing signs of having inherited both his parents' intelligence and his father's easy charm. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the turn of the century, it was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Zachary and Penelope had worked hard to build not just a business but a legacy for their children. The land was well managed, the cattle were quality stock, and the financial foundation was solid. But beyond the material success, they had built something more important: a home filled with love and respect, where children grew up knowing they were valued, where hard work was rewarded but kindness was treasured above all else. They had created the kind of family that both of them had dreamed of, the kind that weathered any storm because it was built on a foundation of genuine partnership and love. On their 20th anniversary in 1903, Zachary took Penelope back to Tucson, just as they had gone 20 years earlier. They walked the same streets, though the town had grown considerably. They stayed in the same hotel, though it had been renovated and expanded, and they talked about everything that had happened in those 2 decades. "I would not change a single thing," Penelope said as they sat together in their hotel room. "Even the hard times, the struggles, the moments when I was terrified, all of it brought us here to this moment, and I am grateful for every bit of it." "I love you more now than I did when we married," Zachary said, pulling her close. "I did not think that was possible, but every year I find new reasons to love you. Your strength, your intelligence, your kindness, the way you have made our house a home and raised our children to be good people. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope. And you are the man who showed me that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness," Penelope replied. "You are the one who saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. You gave me a life I never dared to dream of." They made love that night with the passion of newlyweds, but also with the deep tenderness that comes from years of knowing and loving each other completely. In the morning, they began the journey home to the ranch, to their children, to the life they had built together. Peter graduated from university in 1904 and returned home with a degree in agricultural science and a head full of ideas for improving the ranch. He and Zachary spent hours discussing new breeding techniques, better irrigation methods, more efficient ways to manage the land. It was clear that Peter would eventually take over the ranch, and both Zachary and Penelope were pleased to see how seriously he took that responsibility. The twins finished their own educations, and in 1905, Patricia became Penelope's full partner in running the school. She had a natural gift for teaching and brought new energy to the program. Pauline, meanwhile, surprised everyone by announcing that she wanted to start breeding horses. Zachary helped her get started, giving her a section of the ranch to work with and teaching her everything he knew about selecting and training quality stock. Philip, growing into a thoughtful teenager, had not yet decided what path he would take. He seemed to have interests in everything, from his mother's teaching to his father's ranching to his brother's scientific approach to agriculture. But there was time for him to figure out his future. As Penelope entered her 40s and Zachary his 50s, they both began to slow down slightly. Not from illness or weakness, but from the natural aging that comes to everyone. They hired more help for the ranch, bringing on young cowboys who were eager to learn from Zachary's experience. They gradually turned over more responsibilities to their children, preparing the next generation to take the reins. But they never stopped being partners. They still made all major decisions together. They still rode out across the land together when the weather was nice, checking on the cattle and simply enjoying being together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and talking about their day, their children, their dreams for the future. In 1910, Peter married a young woman from Tucson named Helen. The wedding was held at the ranch, a joyful celebration that brought together friends and family from across the territory. Watching her son marry for love, seeing the way he looked at his new wife with the same devotion Zachary had always shown her, Penelope felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She and Zachary had not only built a good life for themselves, but had shown their children what a real partnership looked like. 2 years later, Patricia married a teacher from Phoenix, a kind man named James who shared her passion for education. They planned to continue running the school together, expanding it to serve even more children in the growing community. Pauline seemed in no hurry to marry, too busy with her horse breeding operation, which had become quite successful. She had developed a reputation for producing quality horses that were both strong and trainable, and people came from all over the territory to buy from her. Philip, at 17, was preparing to attend university himself, following in his older brother's footsteps. He had decided he wanted to study law, with the goal of eventually helping families like his own navigate the complex legal issues of land ownership and water rights in the growing state. Arizona had become a state in 1912, and there was much work to be done to establish proper legal frameworks. As the years continued to pass, Penelope and Zachary transitioned more fully into the roles of elder statesmen of the ranch. They were still involved in decision-making, still offered advice and guidance when asked, but the day-to-day operations had largely passed to the younger generation. They spent more time together, just the two of them, rediscovering the simple pleasure of each other's company. They took long rides across the land they had worked so hard to build, remembering the early days when it had been just the two of them and everything had seemed so uncertain. "Do you remember the first time we rode out together?" Zachary asked one day as they sat on a rise overlooking the ranch. "You had never been on a horse before, and you were trying so hard not to show how nervous you were." "I remember thinking that Rosie was enormous and that I was going to fall off and embarrass myself," Penelope laughed. "I did not want you to think you had made a mistake bringing me here." "I knew from the first day that I had not made a mistake," Zachary said seriously. "You were so brave, Penelope. You still are. You took a chance on a future with a stranger, traveled halfway across the country and built something extraordinary. You should be proud of everything you have accomplished." "We accomplished," Penelope corrected gently. "Everything we did together. That is what makes it extraordinary." In 1915, Penelope was 55 and Zachary was 64. They had been married for 32 years, had raised 4 children who were all doing well and making their own marks on the world. The ranch was prospering under Peter's management, incorporating new techniques while maintaining the core values of sustainability and quality that Zachary had always emphasized. The school had grown into a proper institution, with 3 teachers and plans to build an even larger building to accommodate all the children in the expanding community. Patricia was serving on the State Board of Education, advocating for better funding and standards for rural schools across Arizona. Pauline's horse breeding operation had become legendary, and she had hired several workers to help her manage the growing demand. She had finally married the previous year, choosing a quiet cowboy who loved horses as much as she did. Philip had graduated from law school and was working in Phoenix, but came home regularly to help families in the area with legal matters. He had a special passion for helping small ranchers protect their water rights against larger, more powerful interests. One evening, as Penelope and Zachary sat on the porch watching the sunset, Penelope reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. "I came here expecting hard labor," she said quietly. "I expected to work myself to exhaustion just to earn a place to sleep and food to eat. I expected to be treated as a servant at best, maybe worse. I never expected kindness. I certainly never expected love. And I expected to find someone to help with the work," Zachary replied, reaching over to take her hand. "Someone to share the burden of running this place. I never expected to find my soulmate, my partner in every sense of the word. I never expected to fall so deeply in love that 32 years later I still feel the same rush of joy when you walk into a room." "We were lucky," Penelope said. "No," Zachary corrected. "Luck was what brought you here. Everything after that was choice. We chose to be kind to each other. We chose to work together as equals. We chose to build something meaningful. That was not luck. That was us deciding every single day to honor and respect and love each other." Penelope turned to look at him, this man who had transformed her life so completely. There was gray in his hair now and lines on his face that spoke of decades spent working under the harsh Arizona sun. but his eyes were still the same warm brown that had looked at her with such kindness that first day in Tombstone. His smile was still the one that made her heart skip a beat. "I love you," she said, words that had become almost like a prayer over the years, something she said every day and meant more each time. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Zachary replied. "You are the best decision I ever made, Penelope Garrett, the very best." They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with life. Their children were raising families of their own, continuing the legacy of love and hard work and mutual respect. The land was healthy and productive, carefully managed for future generations. It was not the life Penelope had expected when she stepped off that train in Tombstone so many years ago. It was infinitely better. She had come expecting to be treated as a servant, a worker whose only value was in her labor. Instead, she had been treated like a queen from the very beginning, valued for who she was rather than what she could do. But more than that, she had been treated as an equal partner, someone whose thoughts and opinions and dreams mattered as much as anyone's. Zachary had not put her on a pedestal or locked her away like a precious object. He had invited her to stand beside him, to work with him, to build something extraordinary together. And that, Penelope thought as Zachary squeezed her hand gently, was worth more than all the kingdoms in the world. She had come to Arizona searching for survival and had found love. She had come expecting hard labor and had found a true partnership. She had come as Penelope Barrett, a desperate woman with few options, and had become Penelope Garrett, a woman who knew her own worth and had built a life of meaning and purpose. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Penelope leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. The mail-order bride who had arrived expecting nothing but hardship had instead found everything she never knew she needed. And in finding it, she had helped create a legacy that would endure long after she and Zachary were gone. The years that followed were peaceful and full. Penelope and Zachary gradually transitioned into the role of grandparents, delighting in the new generation that began to appear. Peter and Helen had 3 children, and watching Zachary with his grandchildren brought Penelope as much joy as watching him with their own children had. He was patient and kind, always ready with a story or a gentle word of encouragement. Patricia and James had 2 children of their own, both of whom showed early signs of inheriting their parents' love of learning. Pauline and her husband had a daughter who seemed destined to follow in her mother's footsteps with horses. Even Philip, who had married while working in Phoenix, brought his wife home regularly, and they announced they were expecting their first child in 1918. The ranch continued to evolve under Peter's management. He implemented many of the scientific principles he had learned at university, improving the quality of the herd and the productivity of the land. But he never forgot the fundamental values his parents had instilled in him: respect for the land, fair treatment of workers, and the importance of being a good neighbor and community member. Penelope finally retired from active teaching in 1917, at the age of 57. Patricia had taken over as head of the school years earlier, and while Penelope still occasionally helped with special lessons or tutoring, her active teaching days were behind her. It felt strange at first, after so many years of having the school be such a central part of her life. But she found new ways to contribute, writing curriculum guides that Patricia and the other teachers used, and mentoring young teachers who came to work at the school. She also finally had time to pursue some interests she had never had time for before. She started a small lending library in their home, opening it to anyone in the community who wanted to borrow books. She joined a quilting circle with Mrs. Chen and other women from the area, creating beautiful quilts that were both practical and artistic. She spent more time in the garden, not for necessity but for pleasure, growing flowers simply because she enjoyed their beauty. But most of all, she spent time with Zachary. After decades of both of them working dawn to dusk, they finally had the luxury of simply being together. They would take long rides across the ranch, not to check on cattle but just to enjoy the land and each other's company. They would sit on the porch for hours, reading or talking or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that comes from years of knowing each other completely. On their 40th anniversary in 1923, their children threw them a massive celebration at the ranch. Friends and family came from across Arizona and beyond. There was food and music and dancing, and speeches that made Penelope cry and laugh in equal measure. Peter stood up and talked about what it had meant to grow up watching his parents work as equal partners, how it had shaped his own marriage and his approach to life. Patricia spoke about her mother's dedication to education and how it had changed the lives of countless children. Pauline, never comfortable with public speaking, simply raised her glass and said, "To Ma and Pa, who showed us all what real love looks like." Philip, always the most eloquent, gave a speech about partnership and respect, about how his parents had built not just a successful ranch but a model for how people should treat each other. "In a world that often values dominance and power," he said, "my parents chose equality and love. In a time when women were often treated as property, my father treated my mother as a queen. And my mother, in turn, treated him with the same respect and devotion. They did not just build a ranch. They built a legacy of love that will endure for generations." As Penelope listened to her children speak, surrounded by grandchildren and friends and the community they had helped build, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the train in Tombstone 40 years earlier, prepared for the worst and hoping merely to survive. She could never have imagined this. The love, the family, the respect, the joy. She could never have dreamed that life could be so full and rich and meaningful. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Penelope and Zachary lay in bed together, tired but happy. 40 years, Zachary said wonderingly. "It seems impossible that so much time has passed." "And yet not nearly enough time," Penelope replied. "I could live 40 more years with you and it would not be enough." Zachary pulled her close, and they lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night. The house settling, the distant call of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. "I meant what I said in my vows all those years ago," Zachary murmured. "I have loved you and honored you every day of our marriage. You made my life complete, Penelope." "And you gave me a life I never dared to hope for," Penelope replied. "You treated me like a queen when I expected to be treated like a servant. You valued me when I did not even value myself. You loved me before I knew what real love was." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, as they had done for 40 years, as they hoped to do for many more years to come. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Zachary's health began to decline slowly in his early 70s. Nothing dramatic, but the accumulated wear of a lifetime of hard physical labor. He moved more slowly, tired more easily, sometimes had trouble with his joints, but his mind remained sharp and his love for Penelope never wavered. Penelope herself was in relatively good health, though she too felt the weight of years. Her hair was completely gray now, and her hands, which had been rough from work since childhood, were gnarled with arthritis. But she could still ride a horse, could still tend her garden, could still sit on the porch with Zachary and talk for hours. In 1928, they celebrated their 45th anniversary quietly, just the two of them. The big celebration 5 years earlier had been wonderful, but this time they wanted something more intimate. They rode out to a spot they had always loved, a rise that overlooked the entire ranch, and had a picnic lunch. "You remember what you asked me," Penelope said as they sat together on a blanket, looking out over the land. "That first week when you asked if I wanted to marry you, you told me I could leave if I wanted to, that you would not force me to stay." "I remember," Zachary said. "I was terrified you would say no, that you would take the money and go back east." "I am glad I stayed," Penelope said simply. "This life we built together has been everything I never knew I wanted. You showed me what it means to be truly valued, truly loved. You gave me a partnership, not a prison. A home, not just a house. A family, not just obligations." "You gave me all those things too," Zachary replied. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions, surviving but not really living. You brought joy and purpose back into my life. You made everything better just by being here." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the distance, seeing the ranch that had grown so much from those early days when it had been just the two of them working to make it succeed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar, beautiful colors, Zachary turned to Penelope and took both her hands in his. "If I had it to do over again," he said seriously, "knowing everything that would happen, all the good times and the hard times, I would not change a single thing. Every moment with you has been a gift." "Neither would I," Penelope agreed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Not one single thing." They rode back to the house as the stars came out, moving slowly but together, always together. Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1930, at the age of 79. He had lived a long, full life, surrounded by love until the very end. Penelope was devastated by his loss, but she also felt grateful for the 47 years they had shared. Not everyone got that kind of love, that kind of partnership. She had been blessed beyond measure. Her children wanted her to come live with one of them, worried about her being alone on the ranch. But Penelope chose to stay in the house she and Zachary had shared for so many years. She was 70 years old, but she was still capable of taking care of herself, and she wanted to be surrounded by the memories they had created together. She lived for another 8 years, watching her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Peter's management, taking pride in all that she and Zachary had built together. In the quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch, the same porch where she and Zachary had spent so many hours together. She would remember that first day when he had picked her up in Tombstone, how gentle he had been, how he had immediately started treating her with a respect she had never experienced before. She would remember learning to ride Rosie, exploring the ranch for the first time, discovering that she could be more than just a worker, that she could be a partner, a teacher, a mother, a queen in her own small kingdom. She would remember the births of her children, the joy of watching them grow, the satisfaction of building something that would last beyond her own lifetime. But most of all, she would remember Zachary. His kind eyes, his gentle hands, his unwavering respect and love. The way he had seen value in her when she could not see it in herself. The way he had offered her not just survival but a true partnership, a real life. Penelope Garrett passed away peacefully in 1938 at the age of 78, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She died knowing that she had lived a remarkable life, that she had been truly loved, and that the legacy she and Zachary had built together would endure. The ranch continued under Peter's management and eventually passed to his children. The school that Penelope had started became a cornerstone of the community, educating generations of children. Pauline's horse breeding operation became one of the most respected in the state. Philip's legal work helped protect the rights of small ranchers throughout Arizona. But beyond the material legacy, what Penelope and Zachary left behind was a different kind of inheritance. They had shown their children and grandchildren what real partnership looked like, what it meant to treat each other with respect and love, what could be built when two people worked together as equals. Their story became legend in the family, the tale of the mail-order bride who came expecting hard labor and found instead a cowboy who treated her like a queen, who showed her that she deserved to be valued for who she was, not just what she could do, who built with her a life of meaning and purpose and extraordinary love. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch or the school or the business success, but the simple truth that real love, real partnership, real respect can transform everything. That two people who choose each other, who honor each other, who build together rather than against each other, can create something that will echo through generations. The house still stands on the ranch, carefully maintained by the family as a reminder of where it all began. And on quiet evenings, if you sit on the porch and listen carefully, you might almost hear the echo of two voices, talking and laughing together, the sound of a love that death itself could not diminish. Penelope Barrett had boarded a train in Boston in 1882, desperate and frightened, expecting nothing but hardship and hard labor. She had found instead Zachary Garrett, a man who taught her what it meant to be truly valued. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were both gone. It was, in the end, the most extraordinary love story, made all the more remarkable because it had started with such modest expectations and grown into something magnificent. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who had taken a chance on each other, who had chosen kindness and respect and partnership, who had created a life together that was richer than either could have imagined. Their story was a testament to the transformative power of love, to the importance of treating each other with dignity and respect, to the incredible things that can be built when two people truly commit to being partners in every sense of the word. And though Penelope and Zachary were long gone, their love lived on in the family they had created, in the land they had nurtured, in the values they had instilled in every generation that followed. The mail-order bride who had expected nothing had found everything. And in finding it, she had helped create a legacy that would never be forgotten.